glad to be here. So growing up, I internalized the belief that emotionally connecting to myself or others was not safe. This disconnect was so deep that I couldn't distinguish between my own and other people's emotions. I didn't have any emotional boundaries to help me navigate relationships and could not feel my own bodily sensations. With time, support, and hindsight, I was able to see that this was largely a result of my childhood experiences. As a child, I was constantly exposed to my parents' unhealthy relationship dynamic. Also, my relationship to them was burdened by unhealthy patterns passed on by my grandparents. My grandfather, who fought in World War II, developed post-traumatic stress disorder. His PTSD was left untreated and passed on to my father. My mother, on the other hand, also inherited insecure attachment patterns and relational trauma run in her family for years. So my parents couldn't model self-regulation or co-regulation, nor does it seem that they are often engaged in reciprocal behaviors like maintaining eye contact, picking me up when distressed, or engaging in typical back and forth, age-appropriate games like peekaboo. So growing up in what I felt was an unsafe household, I formed the belief, this is all my fault. There is something wrong with me. During my healing journey, I discovered that my trauma probably started when I was just an embryo. It turned out that my nervous system was possibly underdeveloped at birth. When I was a baby, it seems that I cried constantly, and my caregivers couldn't figure out how to help or soothe me. So based on the advice they were given at the time, they left me to cry for hours without comfort. All of this led to the development of disorganized attachment patterns, including maladaptive thoughts like, I am unlovable, and behavioral patterns such as, I better change myself in order to stay connected. Because I wasn't getting the connection I needed at home, I would disconnect from my parents and my surroundings. I formed the belief the world and other people are not safe, and I feared abandonment and rejection. This carried through into my adulthood. I would get flooded with feelings of disconnect, numbness, and disassociation. While having conversations with other people, I would experience racing and conflicting thoughts in my head and just couldn't be present in my relationships. But everything changed after giving birth to my own children. First came my daughter. I felt an enormous wave of energy flood my entire body when she was born. It was like a bodily tremor that ran from my heart straight through my lungs. I experienced the same intense feeling when my second child was born, my son. Looking back, I can see that these were moments of deep connection, the kind that I had trained myself early in life to avoid. Throughout their first year, when my babies cried, I would feel it intensely in my body, so I would try to calm myself down before attending to them. This often worked, but there were times that I failed and would revert back to my old behavioral patterns. These moments of failure, when I wasn't able to model self-regulation, motivated the start of my healing journey. I went through periods of desperation, thinking that my efforts to heal would last forever. But I persisted, trying several different modalities, and at some point, self-regulation finally settled in. Don't get me wrong, I still lose my cool sometimes, but it's a rare occurrence now. I've developed the kind of self-compassion I always needed to let go of guilt quickly. Now, I'm able to focus on repairing any ruptures in my relationships, especially my children. I always believed change is possible, as I saw my father go to therapy and reclaim his life after 60. So I was open to going to therapy myself. I've tried a few different therapies. At first, traditional psychotherapy, which on its own didn't help me much, as I couldn't connect with my therapist or process the words they were saying. I tried a listening therapy called Safe and Sound Protocol, which uses filtered music to target the vagus nerve. This nerve is often described as the nerve of happiness and connection. It is geared to reset the nervous system out of defensive defensive states, fight, flight, or freeze, into states of calm. Through this therapy, I saw significant improvement, especially in my ability to feel safe enough to connect with my therapist. Eventually, I tried neurofeedback therapy, which targets specific brain areas and connectivity between them. It works by placing electrodes on the brain and allows the person to visualize their own brain activity. It trains participants to control their brain activity and thus strengthens self-regulation, memory, focus, and overall brain function. My initial assessment showed lower activity levels in my left hemisphere and lower connectivity between several brain areas. After about 40 sessions of doing neurofeedback, I actually saw a difference. I was able to leave stressful situations in order to calm myself down instead of exploding. Ultimately, I underwent 180 sessions in total. When I first began these treatments, I was classified as having severe anxiety. By the end, my anxiety had dropped to minimal, and I could feel the difference. I still can. Through this therapeutic journey, I was able to gain emotional awareness, name and accept my feelings, and view them as a connection to my authentic self rather than a persona I had created all these years to please others, recognize the senses in my body and realize that they were acting as warning signs, and investigate my triggering thoughts and memories. The therapies I mentioned helped me get out of a long-standing automated loop of negative thoughts that were triggered whenever I'd make a mistake in a relationship. I learned how to become aware of the thoughts and then consciously replace them with positive ones. For example, I'm a bad person became I'm a good person who made a mistake. And gradually, some of the automated negative thoughts disappeared completely. And now, I am enjoying my new self as I navigate life and relationships. I have become more assertive with my boundaries. I'm in touch with my needs and able to communicate them. I'm more aware of other people's needs as well. I feel compassion and empathy for others, but without losing myself. I feel more connected to my body, to my ancestors, to nature, to other people, and myself. So I can go with the flow of life without the need to control things. I finally believe good things will happen to me. And I'm no longer afraid to chase my dreams and the things that are most important to me. It has been a heck of a ride. And now all I want to do is pass it forward to my family, to you all, and to the world. Thank you. Marina?
Hello. I'm happy to be here and happy to see some familiar faces as well. What Maria has just described so accurately, so poignantly, is how early experiences can and do affect brain development and essentially act as a blueprint for how we handle the social world around us. These experiences, and this is important to note, don't need to be highly traumatic to lead to adverse effects. But they involve essentially the absence of that give and take that we as humans are primed from the very get-go to engage in. This give and take in the beginning of life consists of picking up your baby's cues and responding in an appropriate manner. And that goes without saying that we're not only referring to, needs for food, needs for shelter, we are also referring to the need for emotional soothing and caring and warmth. This is how attachment is built. At the same time, I think Maria has provided an excellent description of how such behavior and thought schemas, think of them like mental maps, can be unlearned and replaced with more healthy behavioral patterns, leading to more meaningful relationships with oneself and with others. Her journey, I think, demonstrates that given the right professional guidance and availability of appropriate tools, Intergenerational patterns, you know, those patterns that are passed down from our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, can be actually broken. And this is a very hard thing to do. And I think you realize that if you attend a Christmas lunch with all your family. Now, one may ask themselves, what does the picture of a juggler have to do with any of the above? Charlie Chaplin at that. Well, the answer is everything. One of the first studies to demonstrate the brain's ability to change based on repeated experiences was the juggling study. In this study, it was shown how the simple act of learning how to juggle, not that simple actually, changes the brain in a very, very specific way. Areas which are related to the processing of complex visual motion become bigger. And there have been many studies since then which have demonstrated the brain's ability to respond to experience. I don't know how many of you have been to London, but you should know that if you ever take a taxi, London cab, the black cabs as we call them, the people who are driving them have bigger hippocampi than the average person. And why is that? Well, it's because they spent 2 years learning each and every one of London's streets. And they have to take a gruesome test at the end and prove that they know how to go from A to B, just relying on their memory and their navigation skills. No GPS there. Okay, now this is known as experience-dependent neuroplasticity. Why? Because an important feature in this type of neuroplasticity is the act of repetition. Experiences are more likely to lead to brain changes if they are consistently repeated. Now, how does the brain change following an experience? Well, there are several ways. One way it can change is it can give birth to new neurons. We are born with a full set of neurons when we come to this world, but there are areas in our brains, 2 of them, which are responsible for learning and memory, where we give birth to new neurons. This also happens if you go to the gym, so it's not just about the butt, it's also about, you know, your brain. Okay, what else? What other ways do we have? We can weaken or strengthen existing connections. Now that you're listening to this talk, you're actually doing that. You're doing that all the time when you're learning. Connections between neurons are changing. If one neuron talks with the other one, they communicate often, the connection strengthens. That's another way in which the brain changes. Thirdly, if we ever suffer a stroke, parts of the brain that were not talking to each other start talking to each other. So we also make new connections. And this is particular when we're talking about brain injury. And fourthly, we have changes in specific parts of the neuron, like for example, the dendrites, which take their name from the Greek word dendron. And they can be affected by experience. You can see that here clearly. So stress and chronic stress and early stress affects the neuron. We end up with fewer dendrites, and this leads to worse functioning. Now, I think it's important to understand that neuroplasticity can be adaptive, like it was for those taxi drivers, beneficial, but it can also be maladaptive. So, a maladaptive change refers to brain changes that underlie dysfunctional behaviors and are very often at the root of addictive behaviors and mental health problems. And I think this is very interesting. They sometimes occur to protect the organism under attack, as is the case with changes to the part of the brain that processes sensations in victims of early sexual and verbal abuse. So maladaptive changes, which are the result of adverse childhood experiences, are also linked to suboptimal stress responses. Basically, you become more jumpy. Your fight or flight system gets ignited more easily. So, how do we unlearn these maladaptive behavior and thought patterns? This is where prediction error comes in. A prediction error occurs when the actual outcome of our experiences is different to the predicted outcome. Okay, so imagine if I threw a ball up in the air and it continued going upwards. That would be odd. That would generate a prediction error. Prediction errors are there to tell us what is new in the world. So the pink swan we never expected to see. And what is the same? The lake full of white swans that you expected to see. They happen all the time, and this is the way we learn. From the time we're babies, and I think even embryos. So, how does the above relate to Maria's experiences? As she herself describes, Maria was having thoughts like, I'm unlovable, which were probably built from a series of events where she did what she thought was the right thing to do, and did not receive the expected reward. She therefore stopped expecting the reward, the good outcome. But through therapy of different kinds, she started changing her action patterns and found out that the outcomes were not always bad outcomes, and more often than not, they were good outcomes. So she stood her ground, and people continued to love her. She managed to maintain her calm in the face of triggering events. Therefore, the next time, she was less afraid to stand her ground, seeing as the expected outcome had shifted. She had formed what we call a new prediction about herself and about others. Now, how can we mere mortals harness neuroplasticity for the purpose of unlearning? I think the first thing one needs to understand is that change is possible. Of course, person to person, we differ in how easily we can introduce and sustain changes. And this difference may be partly related to a genetic makeup. Nevertheless, understanding that change is possible in adulthood is crucial. And I think something that I've touched upon again and again, an experience needs to be repeated several times so that the brain can alter its response to environmental events. For example, Maria discussed doing 180 neurofeedback sessions, which she feels helped her overcome some of her difficulties. Again, think of the gym example. You need to do a lot of squats to get the good abs, yeah? So the brain responds in a similar way in certain things. Changes to how the brain works and functions, and even how genes are expressed, have also been reported following traditional psychotherapy, like most of you may know of cognitive behavioral therapy, and a lot of you may know of meditation. Meditation leads to brain changes, but the key there is consistency and repetition. So to sum up, unlearning in adulthood is possible and can be long-lasting, provided we are consistent in our efforts. In other words, our brains don't seem to respond well to gimmicks and fast solutions like crash diets, but do respond well to pattern changes that are consistent and ongoing. This is exactly what Maria has demonstrated, that one needs real commitment and dedication in order to be able to change, because change requires repetition and consistency.
So my personal journey has shown me that while it's a bumpy road, inner change is truly possible. So if you walk away with one key takeaway today, I want you to remember this. Any change you want to make is entirely possible at any age with the right tools, and it's never too late to unlearn what's holding you back to live the life you want. Thank you.